My stepmother demanded that I pay rent to live in my own house while her children lived there for free. When I refused, she tried to convince my father to kick me out. But when I revealed the truth about who really owned the house, everything changed. Sandra's smile widened. Well, then you'll have to find another place to live, won't you? We can't have parasites in this house. I was sitting at the dining table, my food completely cold as Sandra's words hung in the air. The injustice of it all. Years of being treated like a servant while her children did nothing, and now this. Something inside me finally broke. So, let me get this straight, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. James, who graduated college 2 years ago and spends his days playing video games, doesn't have to pay rent. Melissa, who's in her 3rd year of college and has never done a single chore in this house, doesn't have to pay rent either. But I do? I decided my children don't need to pay rent while they're getting established, Sandra replied, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. A strange calm washed over me. Maybe it was all those years of bottled-up frustration, or maybe it was simply time for the truth to come out. I felt a smile creep onto my face. Not the usual polite smile to keep the peace, but something different. Something that made Sandra's own smile falter slightly. Well, that's interesting, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm not going to pay rent, because this house belongs to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Then James started laughing, followed by Melissa's shrill giggle. Sandra laughed too, but there was a nervous edge to it. What are you talking about? She asked, still chuckling. This house is mine, I repeated, not breaking eye contact. The laughter faded as they processed my words. Sandra's face cycled through a range of emotions. Amusement, confusion, disbelief, and finally, something close to panic. That's ridiculous, she stammered, grabbing her phone. I'm calling your father right now. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped aggressively on the screen as she put the call on speaker. The ringing seemed to echo throughout the kitchen. Hello? My father's voice crackled through the speaker. David? Sandra's voice was tense, controlled. Ruby is telling some interesting stories about the house. She says the house belongs to her. That's not true, right? The silence on the other end dragged on for what felt like an eternity. When my father finally spoke, his voice was hesitant. Well, he cleared his throat. Actually, my in-laws put the house in Ruby's name before they passed away. You didn't think you should mention that. Sandra practically screamed. How could you not tell me this? I didn't think it was important, my father replied weakly. It never seemed relevant. Not relevant? Sandra's face turned red. Not relevant that your teenage daughter owns our house. She hung up before my father could respond, nearly slamming the phone onto the table. The kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. James and Melissa stared at me like they'd never seen me before. Sandra was breathing heavily, clearly trying to compose herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was artificially cheerful, but I could hear the slight tremor. Well, she forced a laugh that sounded more like a sob. This has been a big misunderstanding. Of course, you don't need to pay rent. Ruby, let's just forget this conversation, okay? I had completely lost my appetite. Without saying a word, I stood up and went upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear hurried whispers from downstairs, Sandra's harsh tone mixed with James and Melissa's anxious voices. By 6 the next morning, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much had changed in just a few hours. Around 7, I heard movement downstairs, the familiar sound of Sandra making her morning coffee. I was about to go down for breakfast when I heard her voice. David, you need to do something about this situation, she said, her voice low but intense. Your daughter can't, we just need to make her leave. I froze on the stairs, holding my breath. I know the house is hers, David, Sandra continued, frustration clear in her voice. But she's making things difficult. She doesn't fit here anymore. She's becoming a problem. There was a pause. Even from where I was, I could sense my father's hesitation. But, Sandra, it's her house. I can't just kick her out. No one's talking about kicking her out. Sandra's voice turned sweet, that syrupy tone she used to manipulate. We just need to steer her in the right direction. What about those out-of-state colleges she applied to? You could encourage her to go to one of them. Tell her it'd be good for her independence. My stomach twisted when I heard my father's reluctant reply. Maybe you're right, he said slowly. I'll talk to her about moving out for college. It might be better for everyone. I waited until Sandra ended the call. Then I calmly walked into the kitchen, keeping my face neutral. I started pouring myself a bowl of cereal, pretending I hadn't heard anything. James and Melissa came in shortly after, both looking uncomfortable. Sandra was the last to enter, still holding the phone in her hand. Good morning, everyone, she chirped, as if nothing had happened the night before. We all sat down. The only sounds were the crunching of cereal and the occasional clink of spoons against bowls. Then, as casually as if I were commenting on the weather, I said, "Oh, and starting next month, all of you will have to start paying rent." "Oh, and starting next month, all of you will have to start paying rent." For a moment, the silence in the kitchen was so heavy I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sandra stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. James and Melissa froze with their spoons midair, eyes wide, exchanging nervous glances. It was Sandra who broke the silence, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You're joking, right?" she asked, her voice almost childlike, desperately trying to maintain control of the situation.
No, Sandra.
I'm not joking. My voice was calm, but each word was filled with firmness. You've been living here for free for years. It's time to contribute. She swallowed hard, trying to regain her composure. That doesn't make sense. We're a family and... We're not a family, I interrupted, my patience completely gone. You made that very clear when you demanded I pay rent while your children lived here without lifting a finger. Now, everyone will be treated the same. James scoffed, trying to appear indifferent, but his insecurity was obvious. This is ridiculous. I'm not paying anything. Then you're free to find another place to live. I shot back, locking eyes with him. Melissa, who usually avoided confrontations, finally spoke up. I'm still in college. How do you expect me to pay rent? Maybe you should have thought about that before spending money on parties and expensive clothes, I replied. But don't worry, the rent will be fair. I can even help you find a job. Sandra finally snapped, slamming her hand on the table. You've completely lost your mind. This house has always been a home for all of us. I won't let you turn it into some kind of ridiculous boarding house. I stared at her, unwavering. Funny hearing that from you, Sandra, because just yesterday, I overheard you trying to convince my father to kick me out of my own house. And you thought I wouldn't find out? The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she was speechless. Melissa looked like she was about to faint, and James stared at his plate, as if he wanted to disappear. I was only trying to help you become more independent, Sandra stammered, attempting to mask her panic. Oh, of course. Independence. How kind of you to try to help me move out of the house my grandparents left me, while you and your children continue living here without paying a dime. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand to stop her. Don't worry. I've already decided. You'll all have formal contracts. If you want to keep living here, it will be on my terms. Sandra abruptly stood up, trying to maintain a sense of authority. This is unacceptable. David would never allow this. Maybe you should call him again and ask what he thinks. Or better yet, ask what he'll do when I decide to kick everyone out and sell the house. The shock on her face was almost satisfying. She knew I had the power to do exactly that, and the thought clearly terrified her. That night, locked in my room, I could hear muffled murmurs and arguments coming from downstairs. Sandra was probably trying to come up with a plan to get around the situation. But what she didn't know was that I was more than ready to face her. The next day, I called for a meeting. Sandra tried to refuse, but I made it clear she had no choice. By 10 a.m., we were all seated in the living room. Sandra, James, and Melissa looked uncomfortable, while I sat calmly, confident. Here are the rental contracts, I said, handing each of them a copy. You have 1 month to decide if you want to stay. Sandra took the paper with trembling hands, and as she read, her face grew redder and redder. This is absurd. You can't do this. Actually, I can. I own the house. James threw the contract on the floor, his face full of irritation. "This is unfair. We're your family."
No, James.
"You're my stepmother and my half-siblings, who treated me like a maid for years. If you want to stay here, you'll pay like anyone else." The argument dragged on for hours, but I didn't back down. In the end, I made it clear there was no room for negotiation. Sandra finally realized she had no way out, but before leaving the room, she took one last shot. "You'll never have your father's support after this." I smiled, tired but firm. "We'll see." In the following days, she tried everything, manipulating my father, creating tension in the house, even trying to turn James and Melissa against me. But nothing worked. They all signed a contract, and the first payment came the next month. The truth is, after years of being overlooked, I was finally in control. And for the first time, I didn't care what they thought. I had the house, the power, and most importantly, my peace of mind.
They could deal with the reality now.
The months went by, and the pressure inside that house only grew stronger. At first, Sandra, James, and Melissa tried to act as if nothing was happening. They reluctantly paid the first month of rent, as if they believed I would soon change my mind. But I didn't. The payments started getting delayed. First by a few days, then weeks. The excuse was always the same: unexpected expenses, piled-up bills, temporary difficulties. But I knew it wasn't just that. James no longer bought his expensive games and spent more time locked in his room. Melissa stopped showing off new clothes and rarely went out. And Sandra seemed to be falling apart before my eyes. She looked exhausted, her face tired with deep dark circles. So, I decided it was time to settle the situation once and for all. On a rainy night, I gathered everyone in the living room. The atmosphere was heavy. My father sat on the couch, defeated, while Sandra stood with her arms crossed, trying to maintain a superiority that no longer existed. James and Melissa, as usual, kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. "It's been 3 months since you've paid the full rent," I began, my voice calm but firm. "I could easily throw all of you out." Sandra widened her eyes, outraged. "You would never do that." I looked at her coldly. "Don't underestimate how much I've endured. But look, I'll be fair. I won't charge my father rent. Not because he can't pay, but because I know he's being manipulated. Out of respect for him, I'll spare him this responsibility." My father lifted his head, surprised, but stayed silent. He knew I was right. "Now, with you, Sandra, it's different," I continued, locking my gaze on her. "You've always treated me like a maid here, bossing me around while your children didn't lift a finger. So, I thought of something fair. You can continue living here, but instead of paying with money, you'll pay with work. You'll clean a house, do the laundry, cook. You'll be the maid here." Sandra's face turned pale. She raised a hand to her mouth as if trying to contain her despair. "You must be joking," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm not." My voice was firm. "And to make things crystal clear, you will wear a maid's uniform. I want you in that black and white apron, hairnet on your head, the full outfit. If you're going to work, do it properly." Sandra stood frozen for a few seconds. Then, unable to hold back her tears, she turned to my father. "David, are you going to let her humiliate me like this?" My father looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "Dad, with all due respect, don't interfere. You know why I'm not charging you. But Sandra needs to pay for what she's done." He sighed, lowering his head. Sandra remained there, quietly sobbing. Melissa watched her, pale, and James didn't react at all. Sandra left the room, defeated. The next morning, I went downstairs and found Sandra in the kitchen. She was wearing a maid's uniform, a simple black dress, a white apron tied around her waist, and a hairnet covering her hair. Her expression was empty as she mechanically cleaned the counter. "Good morning, Sandra." I spoke naturally. She didn't answer. I grabbed a glass of orange juice and sipped it calmly. Then, as if by accident, I let the glass slip from my hand, spilling the juice all over the floor. "Oh, how clumsy of me. Could you clean that up, please?" She stood still for a moment. Then, slowly, She knelt and started cleaning the floor with a cloth. But it didn't stop there. At lunch, I made a point of sitting at the table and asking Sandra to serve me. "Sandra, put more sauce on my plate. And please don't spill it." She served me in silence, her hands trembling. I stared directly at her, savoring every second of that role reversal. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice. Later in the afternoon, I called Sandra into the living room. "Sandra, the living room windows are dirty. I want you to clean them now." She hesitated. "But it's already getting dark." I tilted my head. "I asked you to clean them, Sandra. Or would you prefer to pay rent with money?" She turned red, bit her lips, and grabbed the cleaning supplies. As she climbed onto the stool to clean the windows, I looked at James and Melissa, who silently watched the scene. "You two could help, you know? Or would you prefer to sign new contracts with higher rent?" They quickly got up and disappeared into their rooms. Sandra kept cleaning in silence, and I sat there, watching. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't joy. It wasn't malice. It was the certainty that I had finally put things in order. And I don't regret it. Sandra got exactly what she deserved. My father made his choice, and I made mine. If anyone thinks I was cruel, let them think what they want. No one lived what I lived. Now I finally have peace. And I won't give that up for anyone.